The man at the front of the room had a way of taking up space that had nothing to do with his size. Colonel Dennis Farrow stood at the head of the briefing table at Fort Bragg's Joint Operations Planning Center and spoke the way men speak when they have never once been told they were wrong. His voice carried. His hands moved with the particular confidence of someone who had spent 20 years being listened to, and the 11 people seated around that table were listening now. Some of them leaning in, some of them writing things down, one of them nodding at intervals that had nothing to do with whether they agreed or not. Sergeant First Class Viv Colton was sitting at the far end. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her and a mechanical pencil that she clicked 3 times, slowly, each time Farrow said something she would need to think about later. She was 31 years old. She had a face that people tended to describe afterward as unremarkable, not because she was plain, but because she had the kind of stillness that didn't invite attention. She wore her hair in a low bun. She sat with both feet flat on the floor. She had been in this room for 40 minutes and had not said a single word, and Colonel Farrow had not once looked in her direction. This was, in her experience, almost always how it started. The briefing was about a live-fire qualification exercise, scheduled for the following week at the range complex outside Fayetteville. 3 companies, 2 days, 12 different marksmanship stations, including a new long-range precision course that Command had added to the rotation after the after-action reports from the last 2 deployments had flagged what the reports called, in bureaucratic language, a systemic gap in extended range individual lethality, which meant too many soldiers couldn't hit what they were aiming at past 400 meters, and people had died because of it. Farrow had a slide on the screen behind him. It showed the course layout, the target distances, and a performance benchmark chart. He was explaining the scoring methodology. The standard for expert qualification at the 800-meter station, he said, remains 5 out of 10. We are not adjusting for wind variables beyond the baseline correction table. Soldiers are expected to apply the fundamentals. Viv clicked her pencil once. Captain Roland Seff, seated to Farrow's left, nodded. Seff was 38, fast-tracked, and had the look of a man who had decided early that the most efficient path to leadership was agreement. He had a talent for rephrasing what senior officers said in ways that made it sound more sophisticated, and he deployed this talent consistently. Consistent application of fundamentals, Seff said. Exactly right. Viv looked at the slide. The baseline correction table Farrow was referencing was the standard Army ballistic chart, the one printed in field manuals, laminated and handed out at qualification ranges across every installation in the country. She had used it. She knew it the way she knew her own Social Security number, by repetition, by rote. She also knew that it had been developed in the late 1990s using data from a specific set of conditions that did not include the particular pressure and humidity profile of the range complex outside Fayetteville in late October, which was when this exercise was scheduled, and that at 800 meters, in those conditions, the drift correction in that chart would be off by approximately 14 centimeters to the left, which was enough, depending on the shooter's position and the target size, to explain a miss that would otherwise look like a fundamentals failure. She looked at her legal pad. She did not say this, not yet. The conversation she'd been having with herself for the past 3 years was about when to speak and when to wait. She had learned, in the way that most people learn things that matter, through the cost of getting it wrong. Her first deployment had been to eastern Afghanistan when she was 24. With a scout sniper element attached to a light infantry battalion, she had been the only woman. She had also been, though no one knew this yet, one of the 3 best precision marksmen in the battalion, a fact she had established quietly, at the range, over 6 months of pre-deployment training without announcing it or drawing attention to it, because she had already understood by then that announcing things tended to make people want to disprove them. Her spotter on that deployment was a staff sergeant named Keith Bowen. Big man, good instincts, a habit of chewing on the drawstring of his hoodie when he was thinking. He had not wanted her as his spotter. He had made this clear in the way men make things clear without saying them directly. Through silences, through the particular quality of eye contact that communicates skepticism, through the assignment of small tasks that were not quite beneath her but close enough to send a message. She had kept her mouth shut and done her job. The first time it mattered was at 1100 meters, a mountainside in Kunar province. Target moving between two structures. She'd called the adjustment. Bowen had questioned it. She'd held her position, and the shot had connected. Bowen had said nothing for about 4 seconds. Then he'd said, "Okay, just that." But something had shifted. Not completely, not permanently, but enough that the next 6 months had been different from what they would have been. She had learned something from that. Proof was quieter than argument. Numbers were quieter than assertion. And patience, the willingness to wait for the moment when what you knew became undeniable, was worth more than being right out loud. But she had also learned that there were moments when waiting had a cost, and that reading the difference between the two was the actual skill, the one that nobody taught you and nobody gave you a manual for. She was still learning it. After the briefing in the hallway, Captain Seth fell into step beside her. "Good session," he said. "Yes, sir. You had something on your face the whole time. That thing you do." She looked at him. "What thing?" "The pencil. The clicking." He was not unpleasant about it. Seth was not an unpleasant man. He was a man who had organized himself around not being unpleasant, which was not exactly the same thing, but it was something. Colonel Farrow noticed. She said nothing. "He thinks you're disengaged." "I was engaged," she said. Seth stopped walking. She stopped with him because there was nothing else to do. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent light. A bulletin board with a laminated sign about operational security. "Colton," he said, and his voice shifted slightly, dropped a register, lost the social smoothness. "If you have something to say about the course design, you put it in writing and you route it through the proper channels. You don't sit there clicking your pencil." "I understand, sir." He looked at her for a moment. He was trying to figure out, she thought, whether she was being insubordinate in a way he could name or just in a way he could feel. He didn't find an answer. He nodded once and walked away. She stood in the hallway and looked at the bulletin board. The proper channels, she knew, would take approximately 16 days to process a written concern about a ballistic correction table. The exercise was in 9. She went back to her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up the atmospheric modeling data for the range complex. Not classified, just public meteorological records, cross-referenced with the specific elevation and terrain profile she'd memorized from the site survey. She built a simple correction matrix. It took her 40 minutes. She checked it twice, then checked it a third time, because the third check was the one that mattered, the one done after the confidence had settled and the critical eye had come back. The number she arrived at was consistent with what she'd estimated in the briefing room. She printed it out. She folded it in half. She put it in the left breast pocket of her uniform and did not think about it for the rest of the day. The range on the first morning was cold and gray, in the way that North Carolina in late October sometimes surprises people who have not experienced it. Visitors expect mild. They get raw. The wind was coming from the northwest at approximately 11 knots, variable, with gusts that pushed up towards 16. Viv had checked the weather the night before, and again at 0430 when she woke up, and she had made 2 small pencil notes on a card she kept in her left trouser pocket. Colonel Farrow was at the range early. He was the kind of officer who believed that visibility mattered, that being seen arriving before your soldiers was a form of leadership, and he was not entirely wrong about this, even if his understanding of it had calcified somewhere around 2009 and hadn't updated much since. He was standing near the range tower with 2 other senior NCOs when Viv arrived, and he saw her, and his expression did what expressions sometimes do. When a person represents something mildly inconvenient, it went very slightly neutral. She went to her assigned station and waited. The first relay of soldiers moved through the stations with the efficiency that comes from training and the inconsistency that comes from nerves. At the 400-meter station, scores were solid. At 600, they started to drop. At 800, they were low, not catastrophically, but enough that the range OIC, a young lieutenant named Grayson, was already making notes and looking worried. Viv wasn't shooting in the first relay. She was observing, which was part of her assignment, She'd been tasked to assist with data collection on performance metrics across the relay groups. She watched. She counted misses. She noted the pattern. They were all drifting left, not randomly, not across the board in the scattershot way that fundamental errors produce. They were drifting left consistently by roughly the same margin in a pattern that was entirely consistent with a correction table that was telling shooters to adjust slightly right of where they actually needed to be. She wrote down the number of left drift misses. She wrote down the distance. She pulled the card from her pocket and looked at her notes. She found Lieutenant Grayson. "Sir," she said, "I think there's a correction table issue." Grayson was 24 years old, and earnest in the way of people who have not yet developed the defense mechanisms that make earnestness harder to sustain. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She showed him the card. She walked him through it, briefly, without theater, the way she'd learned to explain technical things to people who were smart, but hadn't been living inside a specific problem the way she had. The atmospheric data, the pressure differential, the margin of error at distance, the pattern in the missed data they'd just watched. Grayson listened. His face went through several things in about 15 seconds. Doubt, attention, more attention, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. He looked at the card. He looked at the range. "You're saying the table is wrong," he said. "I'm saying it's right for different conditions. In these conditions, at 800 meters, I'd estimate we're looking at a 14-centimeter left drift that the current table doesn't account for." "How confident are you?" She looked at him. Confident. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him running the calculus that junior officers run in these situations. The cost of acting on information that came from outside the established protocol versus the cost of ignoring information that turned out to be correct. She had watched this calculation play out in different people many times. It almost always came down to one thing, not whether they trusted the information, but whether they trusted the person. He decided. "What's the correction?" he said. She told him. Grayson made the call. He issued the correction to the active shooters for the 800-meter station, framed it as a local atmospheric adjustment, attributed it to updated range data, and did not mention Viv's name to anyone. She did not mind this. The correction was what mattered. The scores at the 800-meter station improved. Not dramatically. These were still soldiers shooting at distance and wind, which is never simple, but the pattern of left drift misses stopped. The scores came up. 3 soldiers who had been missing consistently made expert. Grayson kept his expression carefully neutral, but she could see, in the way he held his shoulders, that he was relieved. Colonel Farrow noticed the score improvement around 1100. He came down from the tower and found Grayson and asked what had changed. She was 40 feet away, running score sheets. She didn't hear the conversation, but she watched it. She watched Grayson's body language, the slight hesitation, the small gesture in her direction. She watched Farrow turn. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite readable. Part of it was the look a man has when he is recalibrating, and part of it was something less comfortable than that. He walked over. She put down the score sheets and came to attention. "Stand easy," he said. He looked at her for another moment. He was trying, she could tell, to figure out how to hold this. The information that someone he'd been ignoring had been carrying something useful. "Grayson tells me you flagged a correction table discrepancy," he said. "Yes, sir." "Based on what?" she told him. The same version she'd told Grayson, maybe slightly more technical, because Farrow had been doing this for 25 years and could follow it. He listened without interrupting, which she noted. His face moved through some of the same things Grayson's had, but with a different quality. Grayson's had been open, navigating. Farrow's was more guarded, like a man doing math he wasn't entirely happy about. "How long have you known about this?" he said. She hesitated. The honest answer was since the briefing. And the honest answer was also the one that would require him to reckon with the fact that she had known in the briefing room and had not said it. This was a complicated truth to hand to a person in a uniform. "I had a concern after the briefing, sir," she said. "I wasn't certain enough to raise it at that point." He looked at her. She was not sure he believed this entirely, but it was also not a lie. She had been certain of the math, but uncertainty about when and how to act on the math was a real thing. "Your MOS is 68W, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, sir. Combat medic. And you're doing range data collection today? Yes, sir. Where'd you learn ballistics? She told him. She told him about the scout sniper element in Afghanistan, about Bowen, about the 1100 meters in Kunar province. She told him about the 2 subsequent deployments and the precision marksmanship instructor qualification she'd completed at Benning. That wasn't in her official specialty code because the Army's paperwork didn't have a clean place to put it. She told him about the atmospheric modeling work she'd started doing as a personal project after her second deployment because she'd gotten frustrated with correction tables that didn't account for real-world conditions and had decided to understand the problem from the bottom up. Farrow listened to all of this. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's not in your record," he said. "Most of it is, sir, just in different places." He looked at the range. He looked at the score sheets she'd put down. He looked at her. "You're telling me you've been sitting on a precision marksmanship skill set that could have been applied to training development and you've been running score sheets?" She held his gaze. "Sir," she said, "I tried to route a concern through proper channels 8 days ago. The timeline didn't work. This landed." She could see it land, not heavily, not dramatically, but in the specific way that true things land when someone is honest enough to let them. His jaw moved slightly. The thing on his face was not comfortable. "Captain Seth told you to put it in writing," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." Farrow was quiet for another moment. He was not a man who enjoyed this particular flavor of reckoning, but she had always thought, that what distinguished the good ones from the bad ones was not whether they avoided it, but what they did when they couldn't avoid it anymore. "I'm going to need a full write-up," he said. "Methodology, data, correction matrix, the whole thing. By end of week." "Yes, sir. And I'm going to have a conversation with G3 about the training development billet." He paused. "You should have been talking to that office 6 months ago." She thought about saying several things. She said, "Yes, sir." He nodded. He started to turn away. Then he stopped. "Colton," he said. She looked at him. "The next time you know something, the next time you are certain of something, you come to me directly. Not through channels, not through a lieutenant. You come to me." She held that for a moment. "Understood, sir." He walked back toward the tower. She watched him go. His gait, the way his shoulders sat differently now than they had this morning, the specific posture of a man who is carrying something he has just accepted he needs to carry. She picked up the score sheets. 3 weeks later, Viv Colton sat in the G3 office at Fort Bragg across a desk from a major named Chen, who had the kind of precise, organized intelligence that expressed itself in how she arranged things. Her desk was clear, her questions were structured, and she listened with the complete attention of someone who was already deciding what to do with what she heard before the sentence was finished. Chen had asked her to walk through the atmospheric modeling methodology. Viv walked her through it. When she finished, Chen looked at the papers spread across her desk, the correction matrix, the range data, the performance comparison, and was quiet for a moment. "How many ranges have you done this analysis for?" she said. "4, Viv said. "Bragg, Benning, JRTC, and Grafenvor. Those are the ones where I had enough access to the atmospheric data to run the models. There are probably a dozen others where similar gaps exist. You did this on your own time?" "Yes, ma'am." Chen nodded slowly. She picked up one of the pages and looked at it and set it back down. "We have a precision marksmanship training development working group," she said. "Currently 3 people. They've been trying to build a more adaptive correction methodology for about 14 months. They've been missing a key piece." Viv waited. "The atmospheric modeling," Chen said. She looked up. "You've been building what they've been looking for." The thing that moved through Viv in that moment was not satisfaction exactly. It was quieter than that. More like the feeling of something that has been held under pressure for a long time, finding at last a direction to move. She had been carrying these numbers for 2 years. She had done it in the margins of other assignments, on laptops in break rooms, in the early mornings before formations, in the particular small spaces that the Army creates around the edges of your official duties, and she had done it because the problem interested her and because she did not know yet whether it would ever matter to anyone but herself. "Yes, ma'am," she said. I'm going to bring you into the working group, Chen said. This week, if you're available. We have a briefing to TRADOC in 30 days, and I'd like your methodology in front of them. I'm available, ma'am. Chen looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone who is making a note, not on paper, but the internal kind. Sergeant Colton, she said, how long have you been working on this? Viv thought about it. 2 years on the formal modeling, she said. Before that, longer. I've been thinking about wind and distance, and what the tables don't tell you since my first deployment. Chen nodded. Who else knows about this work? Viv thought about the legal pad, about the yellow pages covered in margins of notation she'd filled up across 3 different deployment cycles, about the Excel files on her personal laptop, about Grayson standing at the 800-meter line, deciding in 15 seconds to trust her. A lieutenant named Grayson, she said, and Colonel Farrow, and before the range, nobody. Chen absorbed this. That's a long time to carry something alone, she said. Viv looked at the wall behind the major's desk, the standard issue map of the operational theater, the unit crest, the framed copy of the Army values. She thought about Kunar Province, about Bowen saying okay, about the hallway with the bulletin board and the fluorescent lights, Seth walking away, the 9 days between the briefing and the range. It's how these things usually go, she said. She said it without bitterness. That was the part that had taken the longest to learn. Not the math, not the patience, not even the reading of when to speak. The part that took the longest was this, that being unseen for a long time and being worth seeing had never been contradictions. And the only version of this that cost her anything was the version where she forgot that. She picked up her copy of the correction matrix and aligned the pages carefully on her knee. Outside the window, somewhere on the other side of the installation, a range was running. She could hear it. The flat, distant crack of rounds at distance. She counted the interval between them without thinking about it, the way she counted everything, the way she had always counted everything. She was already working on what came next.